So I'm going to try to kill a little bit of time because we've only got 17 students, and that's not much of a turnout for a class that's got 40 plus enrolled. So I'm hoping that you guys might have some questions, perhaps, for the paper that's coming due pretty soon this week, our first essay. Um, this morning I had a couple students show up for office hours, and I don't know what the problem is, but like I missed it. I had Zoom open on my phone, and it didn't alert me. So I need to figure out how to get it to do that. And I got emails saying so and so's in your waiting room. If that's anybody here, let me know if you need to ask me anything, or if you want to meet me after class during my office hours.
I was there, but you weren't there, so I can meet you after office. I mean after
Between
class.
2:30. Okay, all right. Okay,
Yeah.
okay, we'll do that then. Okay, and so let's see. I have a couple questions. I'm driving, not in front of paper. Can I? Yeah, you can email me for sure. You can always do that. But yeah, let me go ahead. I'm gonna type in the chat box. I'm gonna type in my phone number. I hope I don't regret this, but yeah, so don't use that phone number a whole lot. But if you're trying to get a hold of me, like if you're trying to visit me for office hours and you're not getting through, just send me a text message to that phone number and just say, hey, this is Rev or Mariah or whatever. I need to talk. Can we do office hours? And I'll figure out what the heck's going on and why I can't see you in the waiting room. So, but anyway, so since there's only 18 of you here, you guys are the ones that are special. You actually show up close to on time. So I'll give you a little bit of insider information about the paper. Um, to be fully honest with you, so the due date is is it Thursday is what I said, this coming
Today.
Thursday? Is it today? It's today.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, okay, here's the deal. I know I'm going to be so busy this week that I will probably not have a chance to grade them or even look at them till Sunday. So I'm thinking that's probably why there's so few students here today. They're probably like skipping class and working on their paper. It's probably what's going on. Now that I think about it, so it is due today. Geez, I thought it was due Thursday. Anyway, so again, if you're having trouble with it, if you're like, geez, my paper is like, I need to rewrite it. I need to start from scratch. Look, I don't want to make you procrastinate if you already are, but like I said, I'm not going to look at the darn thing till probably Sunday night or Monday morning. So as long as it's in and turned in by then, don't worry. I mean, I'm not going to count it late. Somebody says today, unless you want to change it. Yeah. Like I said, it's officially due today. I'll keep it that way. But as long as you have it in by the end of the week, I'm not going to penalize anybody. As long as it's there when I go to look for it on Blackboard. Let's put it that way. So that'll be that. But yeah, so no one has any questions, strategies. I would say, like, if it were me writing this paper, I was a student and I was trying to make it as easy on myself as possible, I would probably write on the symposiums what I would do. Excuse me, pardon me, just had lunch. I'd probably write a paper. I'd just pick one of those speeches and go to town. I think the easiest one would be probably Phaedrus, because his speech is so weak, I mean, you could just talk about, like, you maybe spend like an opening paragraph just talking about, introducing it. In this paper, I'm going to discuss the speech of Phaedrus in the symposium and talk about, the flaws with his argument. But here's the deal. I want to know your thesis. I don't want to be guessing what is your position. So try to have a nice, clear thesis statement at the very beginning of the paper, in the first paragraph. Somebody's asking about citations. So citations, I don't really care. You don't have to really do like MLA or whatever. If you're just using the book that I gave you, like the handout, the PDF, you could just put it in quotes and you can just put the page number. Plato, page, whatever. I mean, if you're using some outside source, yeah, then I need to, have it works cited. But if you're just quoting from the reading, don't worry about it, right? Just quote it, and I know where you got it from. You got it from the textbook, or you got it from my PDF that I gave you. But back to what I was saying about the way I would approach it. Again, I would just probably keep it simple. I'd probably pick one of those symposium speeches and just critique it. And like I said, Phaedrus, you could just you don't give him a little bit of love. Don't completely tear the guy apart. You might spend a little bit of, if you're doing Phaedrus, you might talk about he says that love inspires us to be our best self and to be moral, and there is something to what he says. When we love people, it does inspire us, and it's a very good inspiration, but not always does it do that. So give him a little bit of love before you tear him up. So introduce the topic, talk about the merits of his position, and then criticize him, and that's sort of like you could do like a 5-paragraph essay, maybe like first opening paragraph, introduce, second paragraph, explain, explain Phaedrus's position, third paragraph, start to critique it. Fourth paragraph, you might think of, this would be a good thing if you can think of maybe what someone might say against you, like, hey, well, what's wrong with your position? What, like think of an objection and a response. And then like your fifth paragraph, just kind of closing things up, And I think, you can do that like 2 or 3 pages. I'm obviously long-winded, so I sit down to write 2 or 3 pages and I write 6. So, but I think these should generally be 2.5, 3 pages, and don't spend a lot of time introducing us to Plato, and people fill up their paper with Plato was a Greek philosopher who was born in just get to the point, right? It's not a history class. I'm teaching you a little bit of history, obviously, but it's a philosophy class. Like, let's get to the philosophy. In this paper, we're going to discuss love, and we're going to particularly look at this speech of love. For instance, if that's the paper that you're using. Okay, I got a few comments here, so let me check, and then if there's anything else, I'll respond. Otherwise, we'll move on and get to class. So let's see here. Try to turn it. Okay, yeah, they're just repeating what I already said about turning the paper in by the end of the week. I think. Let me make sure there's no other questions. Yeah. Okay. Cool. So today we're finally going to finish Plato. I'm going to try to spend as little time on that as possible so we can move on to the new material. I don't think we're going to have time to get to the reading. Oh wait, I picked up the wrong book. They look so similar from the side. I don't think we're going to have time to get to the reading per se, but we're going to at least be nice and set up for it. So next class, read, if you haven't already, read Descartes' Meditations. Read the first meditation. I think it's only like 4 pages. It's a pretty short reading, but have that done by next class. And again, we'll do a little, we're going to do, mainly today, actually, it's almost going to be like a history class in a sense. Some of it's going to be, we're going to be finishing up Plato, so it'll be definitely dealing with philosophy and talking about arguments and things like that. But in order to really, I think, fully understand Descartes, to really appreciate this next reading that we're getting into.
I have a question.
Yeah, we have to understand the history around it. But yeah, what you had a question? What's the question?
Yeah, what did you say have done by next week?
By next week, by next class, by this Thursday, have this Descartes reading.
Okay.
I told you to do it today, but I really don't think we're going to get to it today. So basically, if you haven't already, read the first meditation.
Okay.
And so again, today is going to be more like historical context. We're going to talk about some history, kind of the time period, mainly the scientific revolution, because Descartes is largely responding to the scientific revolution. So we've got to talk about the scientific revolution and what sort of ramifications it's going to have for philosophy. So without further ado, I'm going to jump to my slide. I've just got a couple PowerPoint slides for Plato left that I want to cover. Unless there's other questions. I see something just popped up here in the chat box. Let me see. How many citations and quotes do we need? Preferably as little as possible. 0, maybe. no citations would be my ideal. I really hate papers that are nothing but quotes. You know, it's like this is not. You need to approach this not like a research paper. This is not a. I never understood that either, honestly. Like, don't tell your history professor I said this, and if you're a history major, like, maybe you have an answer for me, but I never understood that. You know, your history paper has to have 5 citations per page, and you have to have 20 footnotes per. It's like, why? Like, who wants to read that crap with all those footnotes? I guess if you're making claims about something that happened, you have to like cite your source. That makes sense. But I find that some students overdo it, you know, because out of paranoia, it creates like really bad writing. No, this is a paper where it's about you reflecting on things and presenting an argument. I don't want you to go on the internet and regurgitate someone else's argument. That is the most common paper I get. I would say half the papers I get are students who, I'm assuming, this might not be correct, I'm assuming they're not paying attention in class, they're not doing the readings, they don't give a shit about this class, and they think it's stupid, they don't want to learn anything about philosophy, so they wait till the papers due, and then they Google Descartes or Plato or whatever, and they find some article on the internet about the reading, and they just paraphrase it, and they quote from it. And they get mad when I give them a bad grade. They're like, I worked hard on this. I did all this research and found an article about it. Yeah, but you didn't come to class. You didn't do the reading. Or if you did come to class, you probably weren't paying attention. You didn't think for yourself. You let someone else do it for you. Okay, this paper's not about research. This paper's about philosophical engagement with the material. And that sounds a bit like, whoa, like I'm not Plato. I'm not Descartes. I'm not expecting you to be like this brilliant philosopher that destroys Plato or whatever. But what I want you to do is just present a simple argument, right? I mean, I think the example I gave is kind of straightforward, to be honest with you. I think Phaedrus is easy. You just, here's what he says about love, and here's what's wrong with it. Why do you have to go on the internet to look something up for that? It's just lazy, you know, just use your brain. I think it's actually, it's lazy, but it ends up being more work for you. I think it's really stupid for that students that do this. They have crappy papers. They do more work. They spend hours looking for the right thing to copy and rip off the internet. And it's so obvious they do that. And it would have been better if they just were like, actually did the reading, actually listened to what the other students were saying about the material, came up with their own opinion, thought it through, put it in words. And like, even if it's not that good of an argument, I'll probably give you a way better grade for that paper than I will the other one. You know, so avoid that. No citations. That'd be perfect, right? If you want to use a quote here or there to kind of back up your claim or whatever, that's completely fine, you know. But if you got a paper where half of it is just some crap you got off of wikiphilosophy.com or whatever, no thanks. I don't want to read that. I'm going to be really angry when I do. Right? It's going to put me in a really bad mood. Right? You can probably tell already I don't like this stuff. I deal with it all the time. Okay, so I've got some other comments here. Paragraph structure you're dealing with. What you might do, Allison, if you got time today, is you can visit me in office hours, and if you want to email me your paper, I can maybe look at it and see if I can give you some tips or something like that. But I was thinking myself, like, if I think I already said this, but I'll repeat it real quick. You know, I would structure it like a 5-paragraph essay. You know, I'd have an introductory paragraph, like the second paragraph, I would maybe do something like just present the material, like, hey, here's Phaedrus. That's where you actually might be citing sources and quoting stuff. You know, Phaedrus says this, and here's what he says about love, and here's a quote to back up what I'm saying. You know, and then that's the second paragraph. Third paragraph, you get into your criticism, you know. So even though Phaedrus was kind of right that love can inspire us, can also inspire us to do bad things, critique, and then a little bit of dialogue. Okay, now somebody might say that my version of love is insufficient, and that I'm missing the point, but here's how I'd respond. And then your fifth paragraph, you just sort of, hey, I'm just going to close things up, right? Here's what I did, QED, and just sort of recap, you know. That's just kind of a boring, straightforward way to do it, but that's, you know, if you want to make it easy on yourself, that's kind of the way to go, I would say. So again, but yeah, if anybody, again, I'll be sticking around, during my office hours for a while, and if anybody has any questions, I'll address them. If you want to email me your paper or something, I can read it and kind of as I'm reading it, give you some pointers. So, okay, any other things? Any other questions? No. All right, cool. Well, let me share my screen here. What do I want? Okay. So last time we spent the majority of class going over Plato's forms, Plato's metaphysics, his theory of the nature of reality, what's real and what isn't, and how we know it. I feel like we covered too much, honestly. Now that I look back, I think we went over it too much. I think I covered way too much material, and probably it didn't need to, right? Unnecessarily. So I'm just going to kind of go over the basic point of Plato, right? The basic gist of his philosophy, and kind of just a very quick recap. And then we're going to talk about some issues, some problems with Plato's theory of forms, this metaphysical theory. And so some objections, some criticisms that have been leveled against his system, and even by himself. Okay, and so that's what you got to kind of give Plato some credit. He was self-reflective enough to, in his later work, look at his earlier work and see flaws in it and try to address those flaws. Whether he addressed those flaws adequately, I guess that's still a matter of debate. But at least you got to give him credit for, being self-critical. So that's going to take up probably half the class, just kind of wrapping up things with Plato. And then we're going to move on to some history, right? We're going to try to move into Descartes. We're going to talk about the modern period in philosophy, moving away from the classical period, away from the Greeks and into the Enlightenment thinkers. So a lot of it will be like history, and it's going to involve a lot of talk about science and the scientific revolution and some of the main figures in the scientific revolution. And I don't think we're going to have a whole lot of time to actually get to the man himself, to Descartes. That's probably going to have to be next time, right? Next class. So again, I repeat myself in case you just showed up. Read the first meditation by Thursday. We are definitely going to get into it by then, by next class. Okay, so how do we get through Plato here? Let's see if I can, kind of sum things up as neat as I can, right? So remember, for Plato, the forms, his general theory is sometimes referred to as the theory of forms. And for him, he's going to insist that all of reality is based on these universal, eternal, unchanging forms, these ideas, concepts. In our reading, we encountered the form of beauty, right? At the very end of the symposium, when Socrates is talking to Diotima and she tells him how to proceed up the ladder to get to all these different, these smaller forms, these insufficient, imperfect forms of beauty, until ultimately he takes the journey and sees beauty itself, the beautiful. And that's a form. So for Plato, the universe itself is somehow an imperfect copy, a shadow image of this higher realm of perfect ideas, of perfect forms, things like justice, beauty, the goodness. And so all the things that we see in our world, all the physical things, they are imperfect. They're changing, they're fleeting, they're physical. They're in a process of decay, decomposition. Not the ideas, though. The ideas are outside of time and space. They're beyond this physical world. And they are always the same, unchanging, eternally true, independent, and completely unique, right? Each one is its own thing. Beauty is beautiful. And all the things that are beautiful because they resemble the beautiful. If you remember back to the beginning of the semester, when we were talking about Plato's allegory of the cave, for Plato, there's this progression, right? As we get further and further out of the cave, we get closer and closer to the truth. This is supposed to represent our ascension from this physical world the world of change, the visible realm, to this higher world of the intellect, the world that's not tangible, that is understood through our mind, not through our senses, not through our body. What we see through our senses and through our body is a shadow, a reflection, an imperfect copy of that higher perfect realm of forms. Just like these shadows on the wall of the cave are distorted, imperfect copies that resemble, they look like the things that they're shadows of, but they're not the same. They appear like the things that they're a shadow of, but they're not. As we get further and further up this out of the cave and closer to the light of the sun and truth, we get further removed from that physical world that's constantly fleeting and changing and never in a constant state. And so we can never really have knowledge of it. We can't really know it. All we have are our beliefs and our opinions. The only thing we can have knowledge of for Plato are the ideas. What makes a circle is always the same. The circle that I might draw on a chalkboard or on a piece of paper will fade. It's not a perfect circle. It's flawed, just like everything in the world. It might appear or look like a perfect circle, but that's just appearance. That's my senses fooling me. In reality, a real circle, the true circle, is this eternal independent concept which will always exist whether or not I'm there to contemplate it or not. So that's the basic theory, right? This is Plato's basic theory of reality. And it's often referred to as a form of idealism. So this is some more vocabulary here for you to learn. Idealism, that's a term that might confuse some students because they might be familiar with the word. You might hear it sometimes. Someone might say, that's just idealistic. You're an idealist. That guy's an idealist. And in that context, it has a slightly different meaning than what I'm talking about right now. You might say that Plato is an idealist in that sense, in that more common sense of the word. But what I mean here is that it's a metaphysical idealism. Plato believes that reality is it's constituted of the ideas, right? These higher forms, beauty, goodness, justice. Those don't change. Those are concepts that are outside of time and space, eternal, unchanging. And they are the cause and the explanation of all that is changing. So he's an idealist because for him, the ideas are real. Other forms of idealism are quite different. You have like later in philosophy, you have people like Berkeley, Hegel. There's a lot of examples I could cite where idealism always involves subjectivity. So yeah, ideas are real and we understand ideas. That's how we sort of understand truth. But there's no object, there's no concept without a subject, without a person thinking of it. But for Plato, remember, I think I emphasized this last time, the ideas that he's talking about are independent. They aren't, if there were no human minds to think them, they would still exist. The concept of circle, the idea of a circle is there even if no one's there to know it.
How you pronounce that man's name? How you pronounce his name?
Plato or Hegel?
No, the one at the bottom, Wittgenstein.
Oh, Wittgenstein. I haven't got to him yet, so hold off. But yeah, we'll get to him in a minute. Wittgenstein. Okay. He's German, so you pronounce the W like a V, so it's Wittgenstein. But yeah, don't worry about him just now. We'll get to him in a minute. I'm just defining this term idealism, right? So again, Plato, his metaphysics is a form of idealism. He thinks that the world itself, the universe itself, is understood, not just understood, but also caused by ideas. So what's wrong with this theory? I think that some of you had your own issues, and we kind of had a bit of class discussion last time. We talked about some problems, but let's look at some of these issues with forms. And I'll actually start with Wittgenstein. We're going to jump to the bottom here. I'm going to come back to some of these other questions that I have listed under Plato's concerns. These are actually some problems that he himself noticed in his own philosophy that he had to address. He's like, man, I still like this theory, I still believe it, but these are some issues that I've got to somehow address. And if you read his later dialogues, some of his last books, most of them are focused on trying to address these issues. So we'll come back to those, but let's talk about Wittgenstein. Wittgenstein, I got the name here at the bottom. He's an Austrian philosopher from the 20th century, so much more contemporary than Plato. He's often considered, a lot of people call him the most influential philosopher, or one of the most influential philosophers of the last 100 years. And that makes sense. He's had a lot of influence. But the thing that's interesting about him, it's interesting that I bring him up in this context because he's really known as a philosopher of language. Most philosophers, a lot of them, I don't want to say most, but a lot of philosophers in that part of, in that time period, right, the turn of the century, the early 1900s, a lot of philosophers focused on language. And they wanted to actually distance themselves from metaphysics. You're actually going to see once we move on past Plato, that's, I guess you might say a recurring, I won't say a recurring theme, it's probably not a good way to put it. Better to say, there's this turn in philosophy. There's this trend, that's probably a better way to put it. There's a trend in philosophy away from metaphysics that you could argue begins in like the 1700s and continues till today, where philosophers in general don't like to do metaphysics. We try, or we either redefine what it is and do something different, or we just don't do metaphysics at all. And we try to avoid making claims about, reality and the nature of reality and such. And so metaphysics is kind of, something that philosophy try to divorce itself from. So even though that's true, even though Wittgenstein is part of that tradition and he is not really focused so much on metaphysical questions, he's focused on language. A lot of what he says about language, if it's true, and I'm inclined to think it is, if he's right about language, then this presents some problems for Plato. Why does that matter? Why does language and the nature of language present a problem for Plato? Well, if you remember last class, one of the arguments that Plato often gives for why there have to be forms, why they exist, what they are, a lot of it's based on language. I think I talked about the linguistic argument for forms last class. Remember, linguistics is a study of language, lingua, the Spanish word for tongue. So many of the arguments that you're presented with in some of these readings or some of the writings of Plato are based on the way we talk and the way we communicate to each other, right? So for instance, I think I used this example last time. If I got these two objects here, and I'm referring to them as the same thing, I'm saying, well, look at this pen, and now look at this pen. And here, now I've got another pen, okay? I'm using one word, one name, to refer to several different things. Now, for Plato, that doesn't make any sense. Why would I do this? Why would I call three different things by the same name? Why would I call, why don't I call this a pen, and this is a spin, and this is a clen, and just keep renaming. Everything's got its own name. Well, for Plato, the reason I'm able to do this, and we all do it, and we all understand what we mean when we do it, the only reason that that's possible is because there must be this concept that we share. We both understand what it means to be a pen. The concept, penness, right? The form of pen. And so for him, this is, I guess, kind of his linguistic argument. We use words, we understand what they mean, so they must mean something. And so there must be something that we know, and that thing we know must be what it means to be a pen, or what it means to be a circle, or what it means to be beautiful when we speak of beautiful things or circular things or whatever. So he's assuming, look, there's got to be a concept, and this concept has to be uniform in order for us to even talk about anything. And obviously we do. We talk about stuff. We understand each other, not always, but we're able to use words. Yeah, go ahead. Question? Yeah.
So, okay, so I guess last class when I asked if he believed in the Greek gods, and you said he probably doesn't. He probably just played along, so he probably believes in one, maybe. And I
Right.
was I was thinking about he says we understand words, and I was like, but didn't we make up the words with we made up our own words with our own, how does he explain
Right.
different languages then, or
Yeah,
languages
and
that
this
have
is where we're gonna get to
meaning?
Wittgenstein. Yeah, this is where we're gonna get because in a way Wittgenstein's gonna have like this response to Plato that's gonna totally screw him up. But what Plato's going to assume, and this is where Wittgenstein thinks he's wrong. But what Plato's going to assume is that okay, if you speak um, English, you're going to say table, right? If you're German, you're going to say what is it? I used to know this. Okay, look, if you're English, you're going to say room. If you're German, you're going to say Zimmer. If you're French, you're going to say what is it? Habitat, right? If you're what's the Spanish word for room? I don't know. I should know that. I grew up in Texas.
Cuarto.
What does it say it again?
Cuarto.
Cuarto. Yeah, like quarters. Yeah, cuarto. Yeah, there you go. Okay. Yeah. So every language has its own word for room. Okay. But what Plato's going to say is that those are just different words, but underlying them is the same idea. It's the same idea, same concept. But then
I
I'm
guess
like, yeah, go
I
ahead.
would say it's a good thing that the Japanese weren't really a thing then, because if you go to Japan, you could say one thing like 3 or 4 different ways.
Right. Well, now I was just gonna say, like, I don't know about the Japanese language, but I know in French, you got 2 words for chair, right? Like, chaise is one of them, and I forget the other one.
Is that just or like in another thing like that recent movie that came out that caused the big controversy, Cuties on Netflix?
Yeah.
Cuties is actually a literal but wrong definition, a wrong translation of what the actual title was in French, which
Oh.
only added to the controversy because a
Oh
lot
wow,
of
made it even
people were
worse.
saying that,
Made it even
yeah,
look worse than it was. Wow. Yeah.
exactly.
So there's like so like I was gonna say, like, in French there's 2 words for chair, and they distinguish between a chair that has arms and a chair that doesn't have arms. But we only have 1 word for chair, right? It's just chair. So do we have a different concept? I think we kind of maybe do. Like the word chair has like a much more general connotation, whereas like French, they don't have a general connotation word for chair. They have a very specific word for, like, chaise is like one with no arms. And geez, I used to know this. I forget. It's been so long since I studied any other language. So, but anyway, just take my word for it, right? But even within our own language, let's just think about this, right? Like, close your eyes and picture dog, right? Like, whatever that is to you, whatever dog means to you, picture that, right? We all know what the word dog means, right? And we can like use it in a sentence and talk to each other about, hey, did you see that dog over there? No, I didn't see it. Where'd it go? Like, we know what we're talking about, but does that mean that like we have the same image in our mind, that we have the same like understanding of exactly the same? I'm thinking probably not. I mean, what do you think? Do you think we're all picturing the same thing in our head when we're picturing dog? Nope, different dog, says Michael. Yeah. I mean, somebody in my last class said that they picture a pit bull, but somebody else might picture a pug, And
Yeah, I
I'm
picture
all,
a mastiff.
a mastiff, yeah, or mastiff. I always picture a bulldog, like when I was a kid, that's what I wanted. My parents would never buy me a bulldog because they said they had health problems and they don't live very long. But I always wanted a bulldog because that was the dog to me as a kid. I'd see the cartoons with the bulldog with the spike collar. This Danielle says German Shepherd, right? So this is probably based on your own life experience. So you got this sort of hazy, fuzzy, whatever dogness. But for Plato, he's like, well, that can't be there. Those are your own personal beliefs about dog. That's not essence of dog, form of dog. There has to be a form. Otherwise, it wouldn't make sense and we couldn't talk. Well, here's where Wittgenstein comes in, right? He says, wait a minute. Not really. Now look here, Plato. If you're looking for some definition or some essence of things, I mean, that might be the way that Plato, it's essence. What's essential to being a dog? You're never going to find it. There is no such thing. There's no such essence of anything. And he tries to make this point through his philosophy of language. He's like, well, look at the word game, for instance. That's a pretty straightforward word, game. You know what a game is. But even that word, it's not like beauty or justice where it's like got all these controversial and people. It's abstract. I mean, game. What's a game? You can't really come up with a definition. Wittgenstein claims you can't come up with a definition for that word that's going to be universal. It's not. There's never going to be this definition for game that's going to work in every case. The reason being, for Wittgenstein, he thinks that words, the meaning of the word is determined by how it's being used. And so you can't know what the word means until you know how it's being used. So you have to know the full context. Okay. So he tries to do this, right? He spends like 3 or 4 pages trying to come up with a definition for the word game, just to sort of demonstrate his point that it's just not possible, right? So, you might try this. We can just do this for fun. How might you do this if you were trying to define the word game? How might, like, some kid asked you, hey, what does the word game mean? How might you explain it to a child?
I would I would say that game can mean, well, the first 3 things I would say game could be like a competition that you're playing with you and your friends. A game could be you treating something as not serious, or a game.
Well, no. You only get one definition. Only one definition. Yeah.
I would say, because he already said the video game part, I would say game also like what hunters call when they hunting for animals.
Okay, well that's a different meaning though. That's like a different context. So that now you're making it even more complicated. But we're trying to make it easy for this kid. Let's just keep it simple. I think you were on the right track with competition, but I think as Danielle puts it, that's probably not even broad enough, right? Because people say I go hunting for game, and you start thinking the way we use the word with slang, like this guy has good game, or he's got no game, or don't play games with me, or it's not a game. Like you said, you don't take something serious. But let's just try the most general definition. Like I would say competition is bad, but even that is got problems.
Yeah, because at first I was gonna say maybe without something without much at stake, but then there's context, and
right. It's like if you're at the Super Bowl,
basketball or the Super Bowl,
right?
That's your career,
right.
Or it's like entertainment, something that's entertainment that takes your time out of everything else.
Yeah, I think that's not as common of a use of it, but I know what you're saying. Like some people will say, hey, stop playing games, watching movies. You need to get serious, Yeah, that's another use, right? So, I mean, I think I would probably say something to the kid just to keep it simple. It's a kid, I'm not in a philosophy class, just talking to some 5-year-old. I'd probably say something like what you were saying at the beginning. It's usually a competition between 2 people or 2 teams, and they've got a goal. They're trying to win, score more points than the other team, or that's generally what you mean by game. But of course, it can also mean other things like all those great examples y'all gave, So, it can mean, you could play solitaire. That's a card game, and I don't think there's any competition there. There's a goal. I guess you're trying to order your cards in a certain, but there's no competition. So it seems like every definition that we give is going to either be too broad or it's going to be too narrow. And so it's like there's really no correct. It's like, as I said, and as Michael in the comments sort of agrees, context changes everything. You have to understand the context. In what scenario is the word being used? How is it being used? That will give you the meaning. And unless you have all that, you can't really give the form of game. Every time you say game, this is the essence of what you really mean. Sorry, Plato, that doesn't exist. But then Plato's going to say, well, then how can you use the word? You must know what it means. It must mean something. And for Wittgenstein, well, it doesn't really. It means what it means at the time. But there is, and what's really tripping up Plato, and this is where I think Wittgenstein throws him a little bit of a bone. He says that what there is a family resemblance amongst the uses of that word. So even though when I use the word game to say I'm going to go hunt games, go hunt some game, or I've got good game, or don't play games with me.
It's so many definitions for gaming. You can use so many ways. It's hard to figure out which way is the correct way.
But there is
I feel like
correct
it's
way.
It's a bit subjective in a way, because in different, like you said earlier, in other languages, they have specific words to say specific things and to like deliver a specific message. So it's like our language might be a little bit more vague, but another language, like how you said French, can be super duper specific to each detail that you're trying to get across. So I feel like it's kind of subjective.
Yeah, and even then it depends on the word. Like right now, Plato is dealing with the word spiel, right? We're using the English word game, but the word spiel in German has even more context than ours, right? Like you could say ich spiele Klavier, like I play piano. So like it can mean even more. So it's even harder for him. But yeah, he would say, look, there is a meaning to it, but the meaning depends on the context and how it's being used. There's no like eternal definition like Plato's form or something like that. But again, this is kind of, him throwing Plato a bone. There is a family resemblance. There's a similarity in the way those terms are being used. The word game it's almost like if you were at the mall and you're sitting on the bench and watching people walk by with your friend, and this family walks by and you're like, look at that family. And your friend says, how do you know they're a family? How do you know they're related? Your friend is Plato, right? And he's like, what's their essence? Like, what's the one thing they all share? Do they all have the same eye color? And you're like, no. But like most of them do. Like 2 of them have blue eyes, the other ones have like hazel. But like, well, then how do you know their family? Are they all the same height? No, the dad's taller, and well, are they all the same hair color? And like, there's not one feature that they all share, but they look similar enough. There's an overlap of qualities. There's a family resemblance. Same thing with the word game. When I say I'm going to go hunting game, or don't play games, or let's go watch the game, he's going to say that they mean different things in those different contexts, but there's a similarity, right? There's a family resemblance amongst those uses, and that's fine. Language does not work as precisely as Plato makes it seem, right? It's sloppy, but it works. When I tell someone, hey, go stand over there just for a minute, they know what I mean. I don't have to say, go stand at longitude 42 and latitude 48. Like, where exactly precisely do I stand? No, it's just over there. You know what I mean? In that rut. So, for Plato, it's like, no, there's got to be an exact right, or else nothing makes sense. And Wittgenstein says, no, it's just that way. It works, right? Language is sloppy, but it freaking works. We have our own hazy understanding of dog based on our experience of dogs, and that's enough for us to speak with other people about dogs. It's not that complicated, right? And in fact, the way we use language is a lot like the way we play games. Like in the more traditional sense of the word games, like when you play football, or you play basketball, or even you play like a board game or a card game, right? How do you learn how to play games typically? When you first learn how to play basketball or football, how do you learn how to play those things?
By watching.
Usually,
or trial and error.
Yeah, usually a mixture of both, right? Usually, you might watch it for a while and get curious, and that looks fun. I want to join in. I kind of get the gist of it. It looks like, I guess, repetitions. Yadili says, yeah, repetition. And then, if it's a card game, you might play a few rounds with your friends, and they guide you. You leave your hand open so they can see your cards, and you just do a couple like practice rounds, and you just kind of pick it up. And Wittgenstein says that's language. That's how language is. You know, we don't. It's not like we sit down and just read the dictionary and memorize every English word, and then read a book about grammar on how to put the words together, and then all of a sudden we can speak English. No, we just sort of pick it up, and like many of the games that we play, it evolves. It's not stagnant. It's not eternal. So the meaning of words, they don't just change based on the context, but they also change because of history, right? Because of the time period, right? I mean,
It's,
go
I
ahead.
was gonna say, it's kind of disappointing that he didn't understand that, seeing as he was technically a creator, an artist, and he should know that language is both auditory, visual, it's written, auditory, and visual. Like,
Right.
and all three of those things can change the intent
Right.
of what you're trying to put out. Like, you can't, like, for playwrights who talk about tragedies and like satire, it's hard for the unless you're really good with your language that you're writing in, with words. It's hard to convey sarcasm without actually hearing
Hearing
the
it,
way it's said.
Yeah, there's interesting. There's a dialogue that Plato wrote called Phaedrus. You might recognize that name from the Symposium, but there's a dialogue just with Phaedrus and Socrates talking. And Plato seemed to think that the spoken word is superior to the written word because it's closer to your soul, right? And part of it too is like what you said, when someone speaks you can hear the emotion in their voice, or the sarcasm in this case, whereas you might not pick that up from the written word. So he does deal with that, but I think, you know, you're right to say that he was I think a bit short-sighted in how much effect that had on himself and his own conceptions of truth. To be fair to him, I think this is a problem with almost all Western philosophy up until recent, and I think it has to do with the fact that, you know, people are just geographically isolated, and so if you don't have as much experience with other cultures, it's easier to assume a universality, right? It's like, because we you know, maybe people here have studied different languages, or you've traveled around the world and you can speak English and Spanish, or you can speak English and French, and so you understand that like speaking a different language makes you see things differently and understand things differently and conceptualize things differently. And I think he did travel quite a bit, but I think he lived in still a world that wasn't quite as diverse and
See,
wasn't.
I push back against that because his teacher was Socrates, right? And Socrates played with words to say different things, especially when he was defending himself.
Right.
So he should understand how saying something this way could change the nuance of what he's saying. Like
Right.
when he was discussing his impiety,
Yeah.
and he would say, "Oh, I'm only doing this or this or this," but in another sense, those people thought you were being, or at least assumed you were being impietous, and then you said you were doing this, and you changed it to now be like, "Oh, now you're not being impietous."
Right. Yeah, no, I mean, I'm not saying that he didn't, like, I mean, I think the thing is, I don't think he took that knowledge to its logical conclusion, you know? So I think he knew enough to know, look, words do matter. The way you say things does matter, at least in terms of how people receive it and how people perceive it. But I think what he would say against all of our criticisms of him, is that he might acknowledge, yeah, you're right. There might be a different conception of truth, a different conception of justice, a different conception of the good or the beautiful in different cultures. But he's going to say some of them are wrong and some of them are right. And so there's a correct answer. And so he's going to say, well, ultimately he'll probably say they're all wrong in some sense because they're part of this world. They're part of the physical world. And so they have to do with opinions and beliefs, but that he's going to insist there is a right answer. So for instance, you might have, you know, Roman justice versus American justice, and there might be some things that are that Plato would say, the Roman justice has things that are good, American justice has things that are good, but neither one of them are justice itself. There is this thing called justice itself, and that might not exist in the physical world. He'll admit that, but it is a thing, and it's true, and it's something the philosopher can know. And so I think it's sort of like he realizes again that there are cultural biases and that he might even have his own, but he somehow thinks that through correct philosophy, correct reasoning, that we can somehow overcome them, right? We can somehow, remove all those subjective elements and get at the essence and the truth. And Wittgenstein's saying there is no essence or no truth, right? Language is a human product, and it's very fluid. It's very fluid. It's much like a game. Do the games that we play, are the rules set in stone? I mean, do they ever change the rules to basketball or?
They change the rules.
Yeah, they do. They do. So
like it's actually based on the ruling, like who's the one ruling. Let's say a referee, like it's based on what he sees, so it can change based on what he sees. If he has a bias as well, like he can make the other team win if they're not really gonna win.
Well, you're talking about, and this is fine, you're talking about like if someone comes into power, they might change the laws, and so you have to follow different laws because the laws have changed. Or
it's like what they didn't see it, like they weren't able to see it happening, but they would believe they saw it. So like, it's something like that. It's common in the real world, like it happens all the time,
right?
Like,
well, the example that I was thinking of, and I don't really follow sports hardly, so maybe someone can jump in and help me out here. But I think, correct me if I'm wrong, that usually when they change rules in professional sports, it's in response to something, like the coaches have figured out some loophole where they know how to make the clock run out. If they're ahead, they're scoring high, they can somehow make the clock run out so the other team doesn't have a chance to score, and it makes for like really boring basketball or whatever. Again, correct me if I'm wrong, but like this is the kind of stuff they respond to, and so the commissioners are like, we got to change the rules to sort of to deal with that. So it's sort of a response to the environment.
Yeah, that's definitely what happened.
Yeah.
Yeah, that can work. Like it's based on like what they're trying to achieve. Say in golf, I play golf, right?
Right.
So like they tried to make everything faster. Like they tried to, how do you say it? Like limit the time that everyone is playing. So what they do is like they change the rules, like a really big change. Like this January, they changed a lot of rules. So everyone was trying to like get a hang of it. But it's small different, but it's a big change. Like for us golfers, like mentally wise,
and that's typically how it happens. It's like it's like imperceptible a lot of times, like especially when we're applying this to language. The way the rules of language change is very slow. We don't even see it or perceive it usually. I think now it's a little different because with social media, people invent new slang terms all the time, so like language changes I think a lot faster than it used to, but it's kind of imperceptible. It's like one day something means something, the next it means something else, and a lot of times it's almost like the way that the sports are. The rules change, they're adapting to changing times. We need new language to explain new things. And so there's not this sort of eternal language or this eternal grammar that Plato kind of seems to be envisioning, where justice is just always the same. It's like, no, like, think about the word gay. How many of you like recently has heard somebody use the word gay to refer to happy or jovial, like joyful?
In the Bible.
Yeah, maybe you're reading the Bible, or maybe you were like listening to like some old like 1950s song. They used to say, like, if you listen to like old music, it used to be in like music all the time.
But it used to be a negative term too. Like people used to say gay in terms of, oh, that's gay.
Well, that was in the 90s. Like I used to say that all the time when I was like in the 90s. Like, dude, most of my friends in San Antonio are actually homosexual. I used to hang out with a lot of artists, and they say it. Like again, like I have friends here in Houston. They get pissed off when I say it. But man, that's gay. Now I usually say weak. I'm like, man, that's weak. I try to like train myself not to, because people get offended. That's homophobic, dude. You can't say that. I'm like, I'm sorry, man. I was a teenager in the '90s. We just said it, you know. Like, yeah, it was like a negative sort of. That's gay. Like that's weak. That's like corny or whatever, right? But yeah, my gay friends say it in that sense. But no one says it like. No one says it. Allison says she says it, but sarcastically, right? So yeah, you hear a song like, you know, we had a gay old time, but like no one uses it that. So that word, you know, it used to be the opposite. You know, before 1970, no one used the word gay to mean homosexual. It just that was not a thing. But in less than 40 or 50 years, it's completely changed its meaning, right? So there's not some like form of gayness, you know, like the real meaning, the actual real true meaning of the word. No, it's fluid, it's changing, it develops and evolves over time, you know.
So
Yeah,
I have a question. The German philosopher that we're talking that's questioning
Wittgenstein. Yeah.
Wittgenstein. So I believe so I'm guessing he doesn't because I'm thinking the reason why Plato believes the way he believes because I guess he's a theist of some kind.
Mm-hmm.
Is Wittgenstein not? And he does because he says
that's controversial. He seemed to be religious as all get out. Wittgenstein, yeah, he seemed to be super religious, but he would never like his philosophy avoids that. If you read the Tractatus, he sort of talks about what he calls the mystical, and he says that there are some things that we can speak of with language, and there are other things that we must pass over in silence. And for him, God is one of those things that we have to pass over in silence. That we
only asked that. Sorry.
Yeah, what was that? Go ahead.
I only asked that because he said language is a human invention. Oh, and I was like, so what? So I mean, I'm kind of I'm spiritual, but I'm not really that that religious. So I was thinking, like, so what is he? So when all these people say that language is something that, like, what do they think we did before that? Is that why
he doesn't really? I would say he comes out, and he never really comes out and says like frankly, we invented language, right? Like he never says that. In fact, most of his philosophy of language is focused on how you can't do philosophy of language. He basically says you can't. That's another, like, language is another thing that you can't talk about, right? Like you can't use language to explain language. And so for him, it's like philosophy is basically a waste of time. Like he's sort of an anti-philosopher. He basically says like the only sort of point of philosophy is to show you how pointless philosophy is. And so I feel like we might be getting off on a crazy tangent with Wittgenstein. But yeah, like, so I don't know if I want to get too much in this, but yeah, he seems to think he's not an atheist, right? In fact, he was a very spiritual man, but he thought that those sort of things were he differentiated between what can be said and what can be made manifest. And he says, so there's some things that you can say clearly and you can point to with language, but other things you just can't, right? You can't, and one of them is language itself. You can't explain language using language. That'd be like trying to take a photograph of a camera with that same camera, right? You can't take a picture of a camera. You can take a picture of the reflection of the camera, but you can't use a camera to take a picture of itself. You see what I'm saying?
You could draw the camera.
Yeah. So I'm like, yeah. So it's sort of like this conundrum that we're in, and so. Yeah, Wittgenstein, yeah, he's an interesting thinker, but he seemed to be, when it comes to language, for him, it's just mysterious. And to call it like that we invented it, I think that's maybe doing him injustice. Maybe I'm mischaracterizing him. It's more like we're immersed in it. You know, we're thrown into it like the way you're immersed in a game. You're thrown into this culture. It's really a cultural thing, and you pick up on it. He famously once said that if a lion could speak, we wouldn't be able to understand him. And people are like, what do you mean if a lion could speak? This guy's dumb. Philosophers are stupid. Well, his point is, if a lion could speak, we wouldn't be able to relate to a lion, because he would be speaking about things like how delicious a lamb is and how great it is to tear a lamb's flesh apart. And we're like, what the? Yeah, like a lion inhabits a different world. A lion inhabits a different conceptual space. Its language is almost like its environment. And I hate to use the word language in reference to a lion. I mean, who knows what a lion? But our language is sort of our outlook on the world, and we're stuck in it in a certain sense. And in order to do a philosophy of language, you'd have to step outside of that, and you can't. Everything that you can do is within this realm, right? And so we're really getting into Wittgenstein here. I love it because he's one of my favorite philosophers. But I better shut up and get back to Plato. Some of the problems with Plato that he himself points out. Okay, so we've got the Wittgenstein problem. Look, Plato, you're assuming that if I use a word, there has to be some ideal that corresponds to it. No, not necessarily, right? Language is not that precise. Language is not that exact. It's evolving. It's fluid, right? But what are some other problems with Plato's philosophy? These are the ones that he himself was concerned about, and he was writing about them towards the end of his career. One of the problems is exactly how many of these forms are there? That's a question he poses himself, or at least he has, one of the characters in his later dialogues, he poses it to Socrates, right? There's this big festival in Athens, and all these wise philosophers are visiting, and they have a discussion with Socrates. And one of them asks Socrates, he says, you really believe that there are all these forms? Like, you really believe there's the just and the beautiful and the good? And so, yes, of course I do, good man. There are beautiful things and good things, and some goodness exists, and the beautiful exists. And he's like, well, what about the form of man? Is there a form of man? He's like, well, yeah, I'm a man, you're a man, Zeno's a man, we're all men. Manness exists, the form of man. And he keeps asking these questions, and for a while, Plato's Socrates is very confident. He's like, yeah, there's a form of that, there's a form of that. And then he's like, well, what about mud? Is there a form for mud? And Socrates is like,
Or a form for water.
Yeah, that's what he says. Well, maybe water and dirt, but not mud. Yeah. And he's like, what about fingernail? Is there one for fingernail? Like, ladies, every time you go get a manicure, the manicurist is thinking of the perfect fingernail in Plato's heaven, the form of fingernail, and they're painting and sculpting your fingernail to be as close to the perfect fingernail in the sky as possible. He doesn't like this, right? He's like, I don't think there's a form of fingernail or hair follicle, but I don't know why. He can't come up with a good answer to what gets a form, what doesn't. I've had some fun questions from students, like, is there a form for laptop? Is there a form for smartphone? Like, what is like for everything there's a form for everything that's there's if there's more than one of it, if there's like several of these, we have to have there's pinness, there's smartphone-ness. This is kind of getting ridiculous, and he doesn't have a good answer for where it stops and where it begins. Another big problem with Plato is his dualism. Okay, so not only was he an idealist, he thought everything was ideas. All reality was composed of the ideas, the forms, and everything else was a copy or a shadow of it. So he's an idealist, but he's also a dualist, right? His metaphysics is a form of dualism, because he thought there were two different worlds. Remember, there's the higher realm of forms that never changes. It doesn't, wax or wane. It doesn't get old. It's just always the same. It always is, right? A circle is all. The idea of a circle is always circular, unlike the circle that I draw on a piece of paper that might get erased or fade away. So there's that higher realm, the eternal realm, ideal realm of forms, and then there's this temporary, fleeting, physical realm. There are these two separate worlds. Now, the big problem is he's got to explain how it is that these two separate realms, how do they interact? He says they do. He often uses the term participation, right? He'll talk about how all the things that are beautiful, they partake of the beautiful. I think that's what it is in your textbook. It says all the things that are beautiful partake in this beauty. Sometimes he says participate, right? They participate in the beautiful. Well, what is he talking about? How is it if these forms are non-physical, they're not a part of time and space, they're outside of time and space, how do they cause things that are physical? If you look back to the story, he uses this metaphor of shadows on the cave wall. This world is like a shadow of the higher world. Okay, well, I know how shadows work. If you're a physicist, you could talk about light refraction and things like that. So I know how like puppets and fire and light cause shadows. But how does this higher realm of forms cause this physical realm? What is the nature of this participation? You say that this world participates or resembles or is a reflection of that higher world. How do you get together these dualistic realms? How do you explain their interaction? And he doesn't really give us a good, clear answer to this.
Maybe it's maybe it's like a form of some human energy. It's weird. Like so I've read a book, not a book, I've read an article and like an actual like comic that discussed this article, that kind of like takes from this article. Basically, in this book, there is a quote unquote idea of evil. The author is atheist. I think he's atheist. And he feels like everything that we have, that we come to believe is like a manifestation of humans' collective energy. So when you say that there's these forms of something, it's like, well, and even though language means different things and all, based on your perspective, your context, your environment, we all have these base standards for things. So you could say like there isn't like, and you're asking like, why is there, even though there's like, so if Plato's saying there's an ideal form of pen that is separate from time and space, yet we have it here, and like how does the connection go? I'm thinking like maybe it's just a collective amalgamation of some kind of standard in that we all said based off what he's saying. If there is a perfect form, where does that perfect form come from, and how does it connect back to us? And I would feel like if he's going off it, like thinking about the world like that, maybe some kind of collective, like.
I think there's part of that. Like, there's part of that solution I think he would be on board with, but there's part of it I think he wouldn't want to be on board with. So yeah, I think that sounds more like kind of sounds like a Carl Jung explanation of like the archetypes, right? And so what I don't think he would like about it is it seems to be dependent on humans. For him, the forms have to have this independent and separate existence. So even if there was no human to know what a circle was, it would still be true, right? Like,
I guess I would still. Well, I think it would still have to depend on human, because an animal without so humans are sentient. Like, I know people don't like to think we're animals, but I think we're animals that have evolved, and we're more sentient and more conscious, aware of everything. We're more so than most other animals. A lot of other animals don't understand what a reflection is. Only sentient animals can understand that. Only beings that are organisms that are aware of these things. So he could say that, it depends on, that would have to be dependent on humans. But I'm like you brought up a lion or a cat. What would a cat or a human, like, they wouldn't understand what a pen is. Mm-hmm. Only humans or animals capable of recognizing something as what it is can project what that is. Like, if he was a cat, he couldn't be talking about the forms of anything, because he wouldn't comprehend such a concept. So I think it has to be based off humans. Or
in a way, I think you're correct, but I kind of want to correct your language. I mean, that is kind of his answer, except I want to be kind of precise here. I think what he would say is, and this is also controversial, but it's what I mean by controversial. It's disputable. There are other readings of Plato, but I think this is a pretty good reading. It's kind of what you're saying. How do forms interact? Like, how does this ideal world interact or participate with the imperfect world? And it is kind of through humans, because we have a soul, okay, and because we have a soul. He might say animals have a soul, but he'll agree with what you just said earlier, that we have reason, we can understand the forms, we can understand the concept of a pen, a cat can't. And so we are a bridge. We are kind of a bridge. And there's even other, we might look to the dialogue that we just read, the Symposium, where he talks about how Eros is a great spirit, which conveys messages between gods and men. I think that's a part of his cosmology. I think Plato might have actually believed that, kind of what you're saying. But I think he pushed back on the wording. He wouldn't want to say that it depends on us, right? The forms don't depend on anything. They exist, and they're going to be there whether we like it or not. But the only access we'll have to them and can have to them on this planet is through our soul, through our mind, through our rational, understanding. And so I guess that, in a way, that is his answer, what you just said. The only thing I would add is, he'd want to make it to where, it's not that we create them. It's not that we might, so something you said earlier sort of made it sort of implied that we get closer and closer to truth. He might buy that, right? That like through time, our concept of justice evolves historically. But Plato would say it's always going to be wrong, because we're imperfect. But if we're using philosophy, as this notion of justice evolves historically, it's getting closer and closer to real justice, to true justice. And so, that concept is guiding us throughout all history. And it's a concept that all of us have access to through our soul, right? So that's how, I suppose, the physical world, at least in one sense, can tap into the non-physical, But he's still got a lot of explaining to do, even if he's going to say that. He's still got a lot of explaining to do.
Yeah, because I'm like, if we're imperfect, how does he understand?
Right.
I mean, I think I've said this earlier, but like, if he's imperfect, how does he understand what the perfect is?
Right. Well, that's part of it. Part of his argument, though, for the fact that there are forms, is the fact that we know what the equal is. He's like, you know what it means when you say something's equal. How do you know that? You've never seen anything that was actually equal. So how do you have the concept if you've never, like, everything's different? I mean, this pen looks pretty similar to the other one. They look equal, but they're not, right? They don't weigh exactly the same. This one takes up this space. This one takes up that space. So where does this notion of equal come from? He says, it's in our soul. It's in our mind. It's in our intellect. And he says, our mind is imperfect. Our mind is imperfect, but if it's guided by concepts and pushes away from senses, don't be guided by your senses. They're deceiving. They're attached to our physical self. Then we'll get, but he's going to say, and this is, I guess, kind of maybe where you're coming from, this is a bit of a letdown, because he's kind of saying, I think we went over this last time, you're really never going to know all this stuff till you die, right? Because you're stuck in this world, and you're always going to be imperfect if you're in this world, because you got a human body. You're going to have desires. You're going to want to get hungry. You're going to get sleepy. You're going to get horny. You're going to get distracted. You're going to see things imperfectly from your own bias. You're going to have your own wants and desires. So until you get out of this darn body, this miserable body, according to Socrates, and you're able to just be pure soul, then maybe you can have this knowledge of forms and understand everything. For Aristotle, that's a big letdown. He's like, I want to have knowledge now, dude. So he's like,
because he's saying these things, and he's like, but then he hedges his bet and says, well, I'm not sure.
Right.
I'm still human, but it's also like, but you can't go around talking about absolutes when you have.
Yeah.
And it just goes back to proof. Like he said, equal. It's like, what is equal? If humans understand equal, why do we have to be taught what that means? And
well, for him, we're not. This is the other thing too. We're not really taught it. This is the other thing about Plato that's kind of tricky. We're not really taught anything. What we mean by teaching is just being reminded. So he's going to say, like, the first time you learned the concept of equality was not actually, you already knew what it meant. You just had your mind had to, your soul or whatever had to be turned on or brightened up or whatever, right? So he this is another part. I don't know if we should get too deep into this because it's a whole other topic, but he also thought that the forms somehow were already in us. Well, not that they were in us, they're not located in you, but the knowledge or understanding of them was like hardwired in us. And that, you know, he thought that our soul was immortal and had lived forever, so it had all this time to learn everything. But then when it was thrown into a physical body, that confused it, so it forgot everything. And so, I mean, forget how crazy that sounds. But it kind of, I kind of see where he's coming from sometimes, because, you know, when you do learn something for the first time, you know, the first time you learn like a difficult application in mathematics, you know, your teacher might be writing all the things on the board. They're writing numbers and symbols and things, and at first you're just looking at them and you're kind of confused and you're not really following what the heck she's talking about. But then after she does a few more problems, you know, you kind of, it clicks, and it's not like she just told you. You looked at her and you're like, that doesn't make sense, and then, but let me reflect on it, and then after a while you reflect on it and you come to your own realization and understanding. So for Plato, it's in a sense, it's within you. It's not that you were taught, you were guided towards truth. And so all those markings on the chalkboard, the numbers and the letters, those aren't real. Those are just, they guide you towards mathematical truth and understanding. They're just a guide. And so the first time you learn the equal, it was really you were learning something that was already in you. That understanding was just ready to be activated and turned on.
I guess what I mean when I say teach, I mean, I guess we can understand what the concept of equal means, but then the teaching comes into like visually or like or auditorily showing showing that that concept. So like money, equal the for when it comes to people and money, equality between people, and I'm not bringing up anything happening specifically in the U.S., but in history, everyone, not like equal has changed,
right?
But between people in
but again,
every continent, or when it comes to money, like how did we come to the consensus of you know, what value what country's currency has?
Right. Well, he's gonna say like, okay, so when I say that, like, I mean, I'm just making up numbers, so I don't really know what the exchange rate is right now. But let's just say like $1, or sorry, let's say like $1 equals like 75 British cents or whatever, right? Like that's the exchange rate, right? So you know, in order to, you guys spend $2 basically in the UK to get $1 worth of stuff, right? So like that's this equality. But we're talking about strict mathematical equality. Plato's going to say that equality is what all the other equalities are based off of. The sort of strict equal, like absolutely equal. And every other equal, like whether you're talking about like equality of people, like these are all misunderstandings. Every one of them is imperfect and not exact. There's only one equal, the equal itself. And he says our understanding of all the other equals are based on that. But we're going to come back to this next class, but I realize I'm running out of time. I've got 3 minutes to cover the last objection. So let me go over the last objection. I'll try to do it within 3 minutes. And then, geez, we didn't even get to half the stuff I got to in my earlier class. So we've got a lot of catching up to do. My 11:20 class, we got a lot further than this, but we had a lot better conversation in this one. So I guess that's the payoff. But the last objection, okay, this is one we might have to cover again next time, because I've got less than 3 minutes now, and this is actually the most complicated objection. The one that I have here labeled self-predication. One of the problems with the forms that's brought up by Plato is, you know, the question of self-predication. In other words, Socrates is asked, are the forms true of themselves? So is the form of beauty beautiful? Is the form of good good? Is the form of justice just? Is the form of equal equal, etc.? And at first he says yes, 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 yes. Of course, the form of good is good. All the forms are good. Of course, the form of beauty is beautiful. All the forms are beautiful. But then he gets to things like having to do with size and distance, and it gets confusing because the guy who's talking to him, Parmenides, asks him, is the form of big big? And he's like, I don't know. He's like, you believe in bigness, don't you? Like, there's a big thing over there, there's a big thing over there. Bigness exists, right? Yeah, so is it big? Is bigness actually big? Why doesn't he want to say yes? Why would he hesitate? What's the problem with calling the form of big actually big? Why does he hesitate? You know, or like, let's say distance. Like, you know what the word distance means. That was a long distance. That was a short distance. You know the concept. You know what distance is. Does the idea of distance have any distance?
No. I mean, like, it's similar, it's similar to game. It's like,
well, he wants to say no. He wants to say no because, and he's hesitating, probably, I'm guessing, for the reason you are. I can't read your mind, but I'm guessing you don't want to say it. You want to say it. It's an idea. It doesn't have distance. Like, it doesn't have anything. Like, it's not a physical thing. So he doesn't want to say the form of big is actually big, you know. But then he's like, well, then,
Like,
you go ahead, Rev.
Yeah. There's no exact bigness. Like, there's different shapes, sizes, and everything. So what kind of big are you trying to portray? Like, there's a lot of big.
This is the problem. It's when he's dealing with terms that only make sense in a certain context. You know, if you say that's a big baby, someone will be like, it's not big. Look at that skyscraper over there. Like, dude, you know what I mean? Big for a baby, right? So it's dependent on context. Plato hates context, right? He wants to have things that have meaning with no context. Just big, just small. It doesn't really work that way. So he's in a problem. If the form of big isn't actually big, then what the heck is it? It seems like the forms don't tell us much. If you even look to the reading, right, when he talks about the form of the beautiful, he doesn't really say anything about it. He just kind of says what it isn't. You know, he says it's not in a hand, it's not beautiful this way or that way. Like, all he says is that it is. It just is. It doesn't change, it doesn't wax. Well, what the heck? If I don't know what beautiful means, you think that's going to be very helpful to me? It just is, and everything that's beautiful is beautiful because it's like it? But it doesn't look like anything, doesn't sound like anything, it isn't in anything, it's not this, it's not that, it's by itself. What the heck is it? You know? If it's not big, what is it, right? So he's got some explaining to do, right? And he's just gonna say, well, it just is, and you just get it, right? That's part of his answer, is that the forms can't really be put in words. What is truly beautiful can't really be described in words. It's beyond language. It's just something you know with your soul, and you either know it or you don't, and you recognize all beautiful things through that understanding. So I'm already going over for time, so I'm really sorry. I kept you guys like really late. I'm going to stick around for just a minute if someone has a comment, but as soon as I close this, I'm going to open up my office hours. So I know there were a couple of you that wanted to visit me during office hours, but I'll open the floor for last minute comments if there are any.
Well, the essay still due today.
Yeah, the essay is officially due today, but I was telling people at the beginning of class, I will probably not have a chance to even look at them until Sunday or maybe even Monday. So as long as you have them turned in by the end of the week, you'll be fine. I'm not going to count off. As long as they're as long as they're turned in by then, you should be cool.
And it'll be open the whole week too, correct?
Yeah, I might forget to change the due date, so don't worry about that. If it says you turned it in late, don't worry. I'll fix it later. Anything else?
I was thinking like, this really prepares us for Descartes, because that's a rabbit hole in itself. But also, at how many words did you say you wanted it to be? Like, is like 250, like 250, 350, 450?
I don't really care like the length. I think I said 2 to 3 pages, double space, 12-point font, something like that. However long it takes you to, you know, like, let's say you're writing about the symposium and you're going to argue against one of the speeches, you know, however long it takes you to explain the person's speech, explain what's good about it, explain what's bad about it, maybe defend your own position. I would say that's going to take at least 2.5 pages, you know, roughly. But again, I'm not really particular. I'm not like has to be 3,000 or 400. You know, it's just I'm a long-winded guy, obviously. So I mean, I sit down to write a 3-page paper. I write a 6 or 7-page paper. So hopefully that's not you. But yeah, 2 or 3 pages, 12.5. Anything else?
And then for the essay, do we have to answer the question, like one of the questions you gave us, or can we do like you said and just like argue for or against one of the speeches in the symposium?
Well, I don't remember how I worded the essay but yeah, I mean, it's just if you're doing the symposium one, I think it just says pick one of the speeches and either defend it or critique it, right? And so yeah, like I'm not sure I know what you're asking. You need to respond.
Essentially, that
Yeah, you need to respond to everything that the thing says to respond to. If that's what you're asking, then yes, yeah. So, but
all right, thank you.
uh-huh. All right, I'm closing it up, guys, and I'm gonna start my office hours. So if you want to visit me during office hours, I'll be there. Y'all have a good day. See you Thursday.